This skill, as well as expanding upon our own, it seems to be exclusive to our species. So what does this do in our brain? Um, Neuroscience has been used to illuminate how stories evoke empathetic and emotional responses from its audiences. When we hear a compelling story, oxytocin is produced in our brains, and that mediates social trust, empathy, and an ability to connect with others. Um, However, it must be a compelling story. Oops. With a strong character whom the audience can identify with and provide enough of that tension to maintain the attention of the audience. This research by Zach actually provides evidence that the emotional impact of stories has resulted in better understanding of important ideas associated with the story and then better recall of those ideas later. This is also there's also evidence suggesting that we are capable of vicariously experiencing events through stories. Neuroscientists investigating parts of the brain associated with hand and eye and mouth coordination in monkeys specifically discovered that the same neural pathways that allowed these monkeys to reach out and pick up a raisin were also activated when a monkey simply watched another monkey perform the same action. Uh, since then, scientists have followed up with fMRI evidence indicating the existence of these mirror neurons in humans. In addition to their activation when observing various other types of actions, these mirror neurons also activated when we see others feeling emotions. That empathetic response is neurological. Dutch researchers took it a step further, actually. That's the Jabi et al. Study. It's a step further demonstrating that humans were able to achieve vivid emotional feeling states in the absence of actual emotional encounters in a myriad of ways. This could be recalling past experiences, the imagination of hypothetical experiences, story, reading a good book, also a story, watching a good movie, also a story, or witnessing a friend's experience, story like. And I'm sure for some of us, listening to music has that same effect. We're not experiencing these emotional encounters, but these emotions are evoked within us. Stories have that same effect. The ability to respond emotionally to and empathize with hypothetical events and recounted incidents from others allows us to prepare for similar problems that we could face. Storytelling in this case acts as a form of virtual reality um, for human life. Um, Stories act like a flight simulator, some may say, for the mind. This allows us to practice for the potential dangerous situations we might encounter without the inherent risks associated with them. And that could be social risks or physical risks. Stories allow us to practice for that potential danger or vicariously experience that potential danger. Um, An astonishing occurrence in our society today is how, despite being presented with clear evidence of a phenomenon, people continue to deny its existence. Other researchers have found that people are more likely to cling to their preconceived ideas and use whatever new information they can to support their position instead of informing their position. If we want to break down these barriers to changing ideas, it's important to find a way to identify and empathize with our audience. And stories can serve as bridges that build a mutual understanding between people of opposing views. In addition to the neurological evidence indicating these um, educational benefits to storytelling, research has also shown that students engage more effectively with educational experiences that incorporate their emotions as well as their intellect. and stories are pretty effective at doing both at the same time. Additionally, because traditional lectures convey information in this linear manner, point to point to point to point to point, students may find it difficult to make those connections between them and to previous knowledge. I see that with my general chemistry class and making connections to their previous algebra classes. Canceling or isolating a variable has been uniquely difficult in recent years in my general chemistry class. Stories, again, however, use these characters, plot, and setting to assist with connecting knowledge and ideas together, holding it together. So here's some background on stories in general. What is the problem? I'm going to frame it, like I mentioned, through the lens of physical chemistry. Quantum mechanics, physical chemistry, but quantum mechanics is such a fascinating yet incredibly counterintuitive subject for many people experiencing it for the first time. Along with relativity, quantum mechanics makes up the essence of the 20th century physics revolution. Despite the accuracy with which quantum mechanical equations can predict results, they can appear completely nonsensical to to new learners to the field. We've made such a radical leap from classical mechanics, both mathematically and conceptually, that we must shift our way of thinking about the world itself when we delve into the counterintuitive realm of quantum mechanics. For students encountering it for the first time, quantum mechanics is drastically different from most of their preceding courses and just general life experiences. You can't think of something quantum mechanically looking at something classically. While students can accept the strange ideas inherent with this subject, research has shown that they rarely understand it deeply. This leads to misconceptions as they try to rationalize and assimilate quantum mechanics with their own concrete experiences and understanding of how the world works. I know I did. I remember feeling this way in my physical chemistry class, though I found it fascinating and did well. And I remember feeling like I could not grasp what was physically happening despite going through the math. And it wasn't until I read Alice in Quantumland. Hopefully this is in the camera. I'll show it later. It's by Robert Gilmore, An Allegory of Quantum Mechanics. And when I read that, I was able to separate myself from the math. It's not a math book, it's a story. It's an allegory. So I was able to step back from the math and allow myself to wrestle with quantum mechanics conceptually. And it was then that I had this light bulb moment of, oh, okay, I can picture this physically, but it's very different from this mathematical stuff, this idea of a superposition, experiencing everything at once until it's observed. It was strange. This is not a quantum mechanics class. Let me take a step back and continue talking about this. In addition to student misconceptions and difficulties in quantum mechanics, there's negative views of physical chemistry in general. It can be difficult to get students to even want to learn it, some research has shown. When asked about their experiences in PChem, an audience at a research seminar responded that they were frustrated with the focus on mathematics and not conceptual thinking. Or the response was that they love the math. The faculty who taught or did research in physical chemistry were the ones who tended to be pleased with the mathematical nature of the topics. The frustrations were from the students. And they weren't with the math itself, but that they couldn't understand what they were learning about quantum mechanics through this fog of the mathematics. These negative feelings were from, or appear to be from, a disconnection between the mathematical and the conceptual in this course. Unfortunately, this math-centric approach appears to be the default pedagogy for PChem and quantum mechanics classes.
I know.
This emphasis has led students to assume that the mathematical algorithms are the most important part, resulting in just a lack of concern of what it means physically. I'm fighting this with my Gen Chem 2 students right now, actually, where we're moving on from our math and talking about Le Chatelier's principle. And I'm telling them, this is about the feeling. You can feel this change that's happening. Let's think about the model that we have. Um, So instead of focusing on conceptual understanding of the material, students resort to these superficial techniques and strategies to answer questions. They search the text for equations with some surface level similarity to their homework, or mimic solutions from their notes from the textbook. Although the concepts of wave-particle duality and the uncertainty principle are generally regarded by instructors as being really important sources of difficulty for students, these concepts are not a concern to the students because they're so bogged down by the potential frustrations in the mathematics. Conceptual understanding is important for understanding, period. But it's specifically important for this context, quantum mechanics. Research has shown, again, that improved conceptual knowledge of quantum mechanics is observed in curricula that emphasize science in a conceptual manner rather than a mathematical manner. In order for students to achieve a conceptual understanding of topics in science, they must be able to translate between the math representations and the physical meaning of that math. Not only do students need to remember and interpret their knowledge of a concept, they must also be able to use that knowledge to draw further inferences in unique and different situations, particularly at the college level. A barrier to conceptual understanding is that instructors, emphasize problem solving in science rather than modeling. Students have trouble moving from a problem solving mindset to a modeling mindset, and their understanding of the role of mathematical modeling in the nature of science is limited. A lot of this is done by Gardner, that I'm pulling actually from his dissertation. Um, Gardner claims that modeling is actually much closer to science in reality, and that physical chemistry, quantum mechanics in particular, is uniquely situated to teach the nature of science in this context. It's apparent that students consider science to be isolated collections of facts without any human influence. In the conclusion to Gardner's thesis, actually, almost as an afterthought, I love the way he proposes this, that we use quantum chemistry courses to teach students how to think about models rather than with models. Not to say that it's not important to think with models, but this is a good opportunity to be thinking about the models themselves. Where are they coming from? I say, why wait till quantum mechanics? By highlighting the mathematical representations in science as models and emphasizing the role of models as tools that can be used and manipulated to understand phenomena, it may be possible to increase conceptual understanding without sacrificing the mathematical instruction that is so essential in physical chemistry in particular. So what could be the solutions? Someone mentioned metaphors. I'm going to take a broad look at that and call them analogies. Analogies in science, similes, metaphors, um, things like that. Um, a roadblock in all of education is that what we teach can be different to what students understand. In science courses, instructors turn to the use of analogies to make information more relatable to the students. Well, some work revealed that analogies from students' real world experience helped generate interest. Other studies point to a real necessity for the explanation of analogies. Since their interpretation can lead to an unintended understanding by the students, we call those misconceptions. Um, However, we can't discount the benefit of these positive aspects of students liking them. Students have indicated that they like analogies and that they paid more attention when analogies were used in classes, believing that the analogies were useful for understanding, visualizing, and recalling information. But there's still some issues. What analogies can lack, however, is a connection to each other. Young scientists, young students, young scientists, uh, from the primary to early secondary education, they they don't easily assimilate a long sequence of scientific reasoning, as is usually the case in scientific lectures at the college level. Students in studies in cognitive science have also shown that without a qualitative understanding, students are unable to solve problems only slightly different from problems they've previously solved. There's a critical need to provide context in which students can draw connections between concepts, providing a qualitative understanding of the course material. So, stories. Teacher education teacher education research has shown that similar series of events can be remembered more easily when portrayed through a narrative. Others have moved this idea into the realm of science by describing that better understanding of science concepts can be achieved where links between cause and effect are illustrated through the medium of a compelling story. Going back to that idea of a compelling story. By presenting science through the what Dudley Hirschbach calls parables, these historical accounts of the scientific process, we can disarm students' fears, contextualize concepts, and provide a way that students are willing and able to communicate the ideas to others, rather than an algorithmic and unimaginative approach to a discipline. By conveying the fascination of breaking new ground and in bringing to life the personalities of the scientists involved and their emotions, we can reflect this drive towards a better understanding of the nature of science. Through these stories and personalities, students can step into the shoes of the scientists, understanding the details that went into their discoveries and appreciate intricacies inherent within them. Students could use stories to understand the struggles of scientists from various cultural angles and how they overcame and worked within those cultural experiences. The realization that science is accessible can be made more apparent in other historic stories. Um, we tend to focus on the abstract derivations and manipulations in science rather than the humanistic exploration and artistic excursions, as Hirschbach would say. Hirschbach advocates, again, the use of what he calls parables that illustrate the errors and failures of scientists when they are wrong in an interesting way. We can use these historical errors in science, such as phlogiston theory, and accidents that lead to amazing discoveries. And we can use these to teach the scientific method. The term scientific method implies a one-way algorithmic process, and it neglects the roles of creativity and imagination. Students' perceptions of science are skewed by this exclusive presentation of the triumphs and successes, which leads to an impression of infallibility in the scientific method. This is certainly not the case, as most scientists encounter failure after failure after failure after failure, and use those failures to refine their methods until they succeed, or until they come across a more interesting failure, and then pursue that. There are other studies that have been used. They've used stories to investigate additional academic phenomena um, in science education. Other publications have provided examples of stories to use in the science curricula. I'm happy to go over some of those during a question and answer time, but let's move into the next step in our story. We've got some background, we've got some foundation, a long-winded foundation. Um, I want to ask you a question, and I'd love to see in the chat, where have you seen stories appear within your own discipline? I'm going to pop on the chat really quick and see. Oh, I love these. I'm reading the other comments. We're not brains on sticks, but brains and bodies. I love that. I'll go back to those later. Einstein's fridge. Oh, I will look that one up. I'm always looking for good ones for my thermo class. Newton's connections. Someone just recommended Exhalation to me. I haven't read it yet. Modern physics really is. 30 years, oh, do I have it? I don't. 30 years that shook physics, something like that. George Gamow. It's another book that's great for teaching quantum mechanics. Ingenious, yeah. Galileo Stepter, I'll look for that one. Okay. Awesome. Okay, well, thank you for adding to these. Random Walk in Science, that's a great one. I'm going to keep moving forward and share a little bit of my experience. When I started teaching in the fall of 2020. Um, some of us may know that would be a weird time to begin a career. I didn't meet my colleagues in person for a year. Um, Moved from Indiana to California and lived in an apartment with my cat for all of that. Um, so during that time, I was given a curriculum for general chemistry. This was the curriculum I was given. We start with the essentials, classifications, measurements, sig figs. What is science? Then we move into the definition of molecules, atoms, molecules, ions. What are they? How do we think of them? And then composition, moles, concentration, solutions, things like that. Then we jump from chapter 3 to chapter 21, because apparently that's how numbers work. And we talk about nuclear chemistry, these reactions in the nucleus. And then from 21 to 4, again, numbers. And we talk about types of reactions, precipitation, acid-base neutralization. We get a little bit into oxidation reduction reactions, balancing reactions, stoichiometry, calculations. And then we move on to chapter 9, again, how numbers work. And we talk about gases, the ideal gas law, gas stoichiometry, kinetic molecular theory. And we end this with kinetic energy, calculating kinetic energy in gases. And then thermochemistry, energy, enthalpy, calorimetry, electronic structure and periodic trends, electromagnetism, kind of baby quantum mechanics with SPDF orbitals, and then moving into electron configurations. And finally, based on those configurations, we see periodic trends. And then we move into 7 and 8, bonding. What are bonds and how to form them? That was what I had. So I taught it 2 semesters and realized I can change this. I'm still early and there's others who teach this, so I'd rather stick with what others are doing. But how can I make this a story? Well, something that I noticed is what does all this build towards? What is the story of that? How did someone see this telling a story? It's organized this way for a purpose in someone's mind. What is the story that they were trying to tell when they put this together? If I am living under the assumption that we are all narrative creatures, narrative animals, I have to assume that the logic structure of something I was given is inherently a story in someone else's mind. So I looked at this and said, oh, periodic trends. Why is the periodic table so beautiful? This is my goal for the semester. Okay, we're going to relabel this. How electrons behave is the main chapter, but why is the periodic table beautiful? Electronic trends help us to understand why the periodic table is the way that it is. So I'm going to lay this as a foundation from the beginning. I tell my students at the very beginning of the semester, see this beautiful thing right here? Okay, you might think it's ugly or confusing. By the end of this semester, my goal is to have you look at this like it's the Mona Lisa, like it's a beautiful piece of art. That's my goal. So that's where we begin. And then I frame the beginning of the semester. What's the language of chemistry? Before we can talk about why this is beautiful, we have to have a language to describe what's going on. So that's measurements and the what is science and things like that. And then who are the characters? Well, that's the atoms and molecules. Who are the characters in chemistry? We've got a language. Now let's introduce our characters to the class. The next is I'd say a little bit of an aside because we need a language to talk in lab, and lab is done with solutions. We need to talk about moles. We need to talk about concentrations. So this is what do we work with in chemistry? A little more practical, a little aside early on in the semester. Then we jump back in and we say, okay, now that we know how we as scientists are going to work in the lab and who our characters are and how do we talk about things, let's dive deep into the character. What is the character made of? The character is the core of the atom, the nucleus, and how does it interact? Well, in chemistry, we don't usually do things with the nucleus, so let's build out from the nucleus and talk about the basis of chemistry. How are the actual characters interacting with each other? Reactions. What about when they're not interacting? What are the individual characters doing? We need an ideal model. Gases are an ideal model. We have ideal behavior here. And once we've developed an ideal behavior, we need to talk about why they interact with each other and how to talk about the what things that prompt interactions and the results of those interactions. Well, we've got to have a language for chemistry. In this chapter, at the end of kinetic molecular theory, we talk about kinetic energy, and that leads us into a discussion of energy. And then we need energy to understand electromagnetism, quantum mechanics, which leads us to electron configurations and why the periodic table is beautiful. And then, okay, why is this here then? What do we do with this? Now that we know why the periodic table is beautiful, what are we moving on for? Well, how do we use the periodic table and how do we prepare for Gen Chem 2? We need to know shapes so that we can understand polarity, so that we can understand intermolecular forces, which is the first topic in Gen Chem 2. So this is the story I tell students. And every time I begin a new chapter, I say, where have we been? And I use these kinds of phrases to talk about where we've been. And then I remind them, this is where we're going. All of this that we're talking about, it's building towards this point. Oh, wow. Okay. So I am running out of time. I'm going to skip to one thing and then I want to go back and ask you guys some questions in some groups. So uh, the other thing that I do is I have crafted some stories within my own class. Thermodynamics, I'm using this book, Anxiety and the Equation. And I have discussion posts. And we do both human reflections and we do content reflections, I might say. So here, one of the discussion posts early on is you have the image of Boltzmann's bust on the front cover of the book. It depicts a stern man, but in life he was considered warm, albeit a bit awkward and sometimes kind of prickly. What kind of impact do you think this has on those who study science? When they think back to great scientists like Boltzmann and imagine the stern, serious, and contemplative nature over the warm, awkward, and he was a bit musical. Um, so this is one of the first questions I asked to frame this book. This book takes the story of Boltzmann's life alongside some of his development of quantum mechanics. We also look at, oops. So here's the man. What about the topic? Another quote I have, or another reflection I have, is about thermodynamics, the laws of thermodynamics in general. Much of what we've covered so far feels like a lot of math. Okay, it is a lot of math, but it's the words that make it truly difficult. A 1946 physics Nobel laureate P.W. Bridgman identified that the laws of thermodynamics smell more of their human origin than do the other laws of physics. These laws were a set of empirical rules that matched our observations, which were more palpably verbal than other laws. The observations create specific conditions that restrict the applications of these laws. Isothermal, adiabatic, ideal, real, reversible, irreversible, things like this restrict how these different laws of thermodynamics are applied. One of the fundamental concepts that took us down this path is temperature. The text describes how temperature has imposed a set of idiosyncrasies on on thermodynamics that requires it to be joined with the Boltzmann constant or entropy in various places throughout our journey through PChem. The amazing thing is that despite these idiosyncrasies, we've done so much. How do you feel about this? Are you frustrated by the fact that it could have been simpler? Maybe simpler? Amazed that despite this, we have the tools to describe the energetics of different systems? Confused and still trying to see what it is that I've described in class? A combination of all three or some other feelings? What are your thoughts? I have some more specific reflections, but this captures an early reflection on thermodynamics. And we use this story of Boltzmann's life. I won't go through this whole next slide, but this is the debate that he had with Mach, the atomists against, and I can't remember the other natural philosophers, and how that influenced a lot of Boltzmann's anxiety and depression. At this point, I want to take, Brenda, how much, am I done at 9 or 8:50?
Well, we need to have, probably need to go into some Q&A time
Okay,
so that
perfect.
people have time to ask their questions so that we can be ready to move on to the others around the top of the hour.
Perfect. We can do that then. What I would encourage you to do then is, what story is your curriculum telling? Be thinking of that as you guide your students through it. And then what new stories can you tell? I would have tried to model some active learning in this case, but I apologize for that. So the last thing I'll mention is that if you're interested in any of this, I'm going to do a shameless plug. Do you use storytelling in your class already? Are you interested in contributing to a teaching handbook on different pedagogies of storytelling in the classroom? Reach out to me. We're still looking for a couple more authors for this book. If you're interested, my email is eroth at apu.edu. I'd love to connect with you and talk to you more about it. We're hoping to get this finalized by the end of the year, and there's some flexibility there. So yeah, if you're interested, please reach out. With that, what questions do you have? I'll get rid of, I'll stop sharing my screen.
If you wish to put a question in the chat, if it would be easier, you're welcome to do that. I will watch and help make sure your question gets asked, or you can just raise your hand and chime in. Jeff.
So I've started doing something. It's not storytelling across the whole year of physics, but it's unit by unit, and it's more of a hook. I try to have a hook at the beginning of each unit. So, for example, for circular motion, there's an old Pepsi ad where a man runs a vertical loop, and then you sort of get at, forces, and they're like, how is he staying up there? It gets them the hook. For projectile motion, and I got this from somebody else, there's a clip out there of Kobe Bryant making an absolutely impossible dunk over a swimming pool full of snakes. And it looks fake. And so, that's a hook into, well, is it real? How do we understand it? And I'm looking for all of these things for every unit. For the first unit with forces, I have a little lab called Speed Dating with Forces, where they just go around the room and they experience all these different forces. So it gets them to start thinking about their own story. What does this mean to me?
Sorry, ask that question one more time.
It wasn't a question. It was just
Oh,
an idea about, rather than storytelling across a whole course, trying to do it unit by unit in
oh,
Okay.
situations where you don't have a whole semester of story.
yeah. I would say that that does capture a theory in education, Alan Badley's working memory model, having something that my advisor described. I don't remember if this is from Badley or from my advisor, but priming the perception filter. We're constantly taking in information and constantly filtering out unimportant things. So having that hook at the beginning feeds into this theory of learning that captures and primes the students for what they're about to dive deeper into with interest and focus. So
Yeah.
that's great.
And Brant raises the question about the need for climax and resolution in our storytelling. I
Mm.
pointed out that putting the periodic table bonding thing at the end of the course kind of brings a climax. I know I found that because that's also the placement of that in my own course, and how much the kids just really like, oh, all my questions are getting answered finally. um, but also, Sandy raises, how do we make sure that we include stories of women and people of color in our storytelling? When so
Oh,
many of our examples come out of European males of the scientific revolution in the early 20th century.
I I make it a point to say in Gen Chem there's a lot of I mean Charles's law, Boyle's law, Beer-Lambert's law, just going through all these different names, and I tell them you don't need to know any of these names. I a bunch of dead white guys. You need to understand how this works. Um, but including the stories of various people in this book, we actually have an author already who's got a chapter on um, oh Saint Elmo and the work that he did. Oh goodness, I'm blanking on them right now. But how to incorporate those into different pieces. It is essential, in my opinion, and I I'm trying to find ways to do that. And now that I feel like I've finally gotten this class down after a few years, I'm looking for ways to shake it up and bring attention to the minoritized people in science. Um,
Okay.
One of the things I do uh, is, and I mean, this is the classic one that I think is we need to be doing more, but talking about the Marie Curie and the radium girls during my radioactivity nuclear chemistry section. So that's bringing in the um, women of science to this space. um,
Yeah. Larry just brought out the um,
ah,
book,
yeah.
Elements of Marie Curie, in the chat there for an opportunity to incorporate her stories. I know that those stories were actually what kept me going as a female science interested person back in the day when I was growing up, where there weren't so many examples. And another person asked, have you had any success in hooking interdisciplinary things with the history classes that students take? I know that's been another piece that I've been able to link a bit with my students.
I would love to. In my so I'd like to connect more with the actual. Sorry, I would love to do that with the actual historians on campus. I haven't had the opportunity, or haven't taken the opportunity. We'll take some responsibility there. Haven't taken the opportunity to discuss this and what's taught in the history classes. However, I do use this book, Suspended in Language by Jim Ottaviani and Leland Purvis, in my quantum mechanics and spectroscopy class. It is the biography of Niels Bohr, and it's a graphic novel biography, actually. So you've got these cartoons in it, and it highlights different historical events that are happening at the same time, and some of the moral struggles that Bohr's faced. After that, at the end of that, we actually
Elijah, can you just tell me again? Suspended in?
Suspended in Language.
Okay.
Quantum
I'm going to
mechanics.
just put that in the chat.
The other one is Copenhagen. We watched the movie Copenhagen. With, why can't I remember his name? Anyways, Copenhagen. It's a movie about a discussion between Bohr and Heisenberg during World War II. Very interesting. And we have a discussion about ethics within my 400 level quantum mechanics class.
Hey, did I mention Sandy and Erica both have recommended a couple of references for Cecilia Payne, and I'm not going to, Kapostyan? I'm sure I got that wrong, on spectroscopy, and Maria the Jewess, the founder of Western alchemy, or among the founding practitioners that moved us slowly toward chemistry. Any other questions or comments? Okay, we have a comment from Jane about a compelling storyline in mechanics. Jane, I don't know if when I took the physics modeling, one of the things that struck me was that there was a sense of storyline there, though it's maybe not as developed as, say, the one that became the chemistry storyline. But yeah, the idea of this leads to this, leads to this, leads to this, leads to that, which was much more than the one dang thing after another that sometimes happens in a class. So that was one of the things that struck me first. Okay. Is there a story your students have reported to you that really helped them understand an idea or concept?
So I'm going to interpret that like broad story, because I mean, you get little analogies that students will bring up, or mnemonics that they use to remember things, or something they heard from a friend for a specific concept. And those are constant. I can't keep them all straight. I have only taught physical chemistry twice at this point. So I've been told that you need to teach it at least 3 times to really know what you're doing. And at this point, we've been developing these stories. I've been developing these stories. So a simple answer is I've not had a student come up to me. They've said, oh yeah, that was really cool. Looking at this course through this storytelling lens, or alongside the story of this character. But I don't have more than that. I will say that the Suspended in Language comes from Alison Fleshman. She's been doing this for years. She's a physical chemistry professor at Lawrence University in Wisconsin, I believe. And she has published that curriculum in Engaging Students in Physical Chemistry, edited by Craig Teague and David Gardner, the Gardner who I was referencing a few times. You can find it digitally online, that chapter, but Alison Fleshman is the one who developed that curriculum, and I've adapted it in my course.
Can you show the title of that again?
Yeah, so the title for this is Engaging Students in Physical Chemistry. It's a part of the ACS Symposium series. You will not find this on Amazon, unfortunately. And if you do, it's going to be overpriced for like 100 and some odd dollars. But her title, if you want to look up her title for her section, um, Engaging Students in Quantum Theory Using a Graphic Novel About Niels Bohr,
Okay.
Allison M. Fleshman.
And can you just show the cover of the book again?
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Would you
Yeah.
mind, Elijah, just putting that name in the chat, the book and the author in the chat?
Yep.
And then we can capture them. And we're going to try to get all the chat saved as well. Thank you, Elijah, very much for coming and sharing with us. That sparked some good conversation. One that I know we all are needing to think about is how we structure the stories, the flow through of the course and what engages students, because if students are not engaged, they don't learn. Just a reminder, you have this little guide to get you to the 3 not breakout rooms, but all other Zoom rooms where these will, Erica, Dawn, Brian, and Scott will be sharing their material. Just click on the link up here. And if you're in room 1, you don't have to do anything. At the close, about 10 till the hour, we will come back in here. We've got a couple of things to wrap up before we depart ways. So please go ahead and join the group. Our presenters will have to get their other Zoom room open. So if they don't already, go ahead and don't be hang on while they get their stuff set up.